What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a late-night set expecting a normal interview but instead faces a host determined to provoke him at every turn? It only took 37 seconds of disrespect before the entire evening exploded into one of the most shocking moments in talk show history. The studio lights were bright that evening. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the set with his usual confident stride, waving to the audience as they erupted in applause. He had done hundreds of these interviews before. This was supposed to be simple. Talk about his new project, share a few stories, maybe crack some jokes. But from the moment he sat down across from Greg Gutfeld, something felt off. Gutfeld leaned back in his chair with a smirk that seemed a little too comfortable, a little too rehearsed. "So, Samuel," he started, not even waiting for the applause to fully die down. "You're here to talk about another movie where you play the tough guy. How many times? Are we going to see you do the same thing?" The audience went quiet. Jackson's eyebrows raised slightly, but he kept his composure. "Well, Greg, I think audiences enjoy seeing characters they can connect with. Strong, complex characters who stand up for what's right." Gutfeld waved his hand dismissively. Right. But let's be honest. You've been playing the same character for what, 20 years now? Do you ever get tired of just yelling at people on screen?" Jackson shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening just a fraction. "I think if you actually watched the films, you'd see there's a lot more depth to the roles than you're giving credit for." "Depth," Gutfeld repeated, almost mockingly. "Is that what we're calling it?" He turned to his audience with that same smirk. "I mean, come on. How much depth does it take to say a bunch of curse words and look angry?" A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd, but most people stayed silent. Jackson's eyes narrowed. He wasn't laughing. "You know what, Greg?" Jackson said, his voice steady but firm. "I came here thinking we'd have a real conversation. But it seems like you're more interested in cheap shots than actual discussion." Gutfeld leaned forward, his smile growing wider. "Cheap shots? I'm just asking the questions everyone's thinking. You've built a career on playing the same angry guy over and over. Don't you think it's time to admit you're just coasting?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Jackson took a slow breath, clearly trying to maintain his professionalism. "I've worked with some of the greatest directors in cinema. I've played everything from heroes to villains to everyday people. If you think it's all the same, then you haven't been paying attention." "Oh, I've been paying attention," Gutfeld shot back. "I've been paying attention to the same performance in every single movie. Tell me, do you even read the scripts anymore, or do you just show up and do your thing?" The audience gasped. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was personal. Jackson's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "You want to talk about showing up and doing your thing? Let's talk about your show. You sit here every night making jokes at other people's expense, acting like you're some kind of authority on everything. But what have you actually done? What have you created?" Gutfeld's smile faltered for just a second before he recovered. "I've created a successful show that millions of people watch. I think that speaks for itself." "Successful?" Jackson's voice rose slightly. "You think talking down to your guests and trying to humiliate them makes you successful? That's not success, man. That's just sad." The studio went completely silent. Even the crew members behind the cameras had stopped moving. Gutfeld's face reddened. "I'm not trying to humiliate anyone. I'm trying to have an honest conversation. Maybe you're just not used to people questioning you. Maybe in Hollywood, everyone just kisses your feet and tells you how great you are." "No," Jackson said sharply. "In Hollywood, people respect each other. They respect the craft. They respect the work that goes into making something meaningful. You wouldn't know anything about that because all you do is sit behind this desk and tear people down." "Oh, here we go," Gutfeld said, throwing his hands up. The typical Hollywood response. "Anyone who doesn't worship at your altar must be tearing you down. Maybe I'm just calling it like I see it." Jackson stood up abruptly. The sudden movement made everyone in the studio jump. "You want to know what I see? I see a man who's so insecure about his own relevance that he has to attack people who've actually accomplished something. You invited me here as a guest, and you've done nothing but disrespect me from the moment I sat down." Gutfeld stood up too, his voice getting louder. "Disrespect? I'm doing my job. I'm asking tough questions that people want. Answered. Tough questions?" Jackson's voice boomed through the studio. "You haven't asked me a single real question. You've just been trying to get a rise out of me so you can have your little viral moment. Well, congratulations, Greg. You got what you wanted." "What I wanted?" Gutfeld's face was now fully red. I wanted a guest who could handle a real conversation instead of just promoting their movie like a commercial. A real conversation requires respect, Jackson fired back. It requires actually listening to the other person instead of just waiting for your turn to make another snide comment. You don't want a conversation. You want a punching bag. Gutfeld pointed his finger at Jackson. You know what your problem is? You can't handle criticism. You're so used to everyone treating you like royalty that the second someone challenges you, you fall apart. Jackson laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes right before someone loses their patience completely. Challenge me? You think this is challenging me? You haven't challenged anything. You've just been rude. There's a difference. Rude? Gutfeld scoffed. I'm being honest. Maybe that's a foreign concept in your world where everyone's fake and political and scared to say what they really think. Honest? Jackson took a step closer to the desk. You want honest? Here's honest. You're a bully hiding behind a desk. You think you're clever because you can make fun of people while they're sitting there trying to be polite. But the second someone stands up to you, you can't handle it. The camera operators were zooming in, catching every moment of the confrontation. The audience sat frozen, watching two powerful personalities clash in real time. Gutfeld's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. I don't have to handle anything from you. This is my show. You're on my stage. And if you don't like how I run things, there's the door. Jackson stared at him for a long moment. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Then Jackson smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who had just made a decision. You're right, Jackson said quietly. This is your show, and it's a perfect reflection of you. Small, petty, mean, spirited. I don't need to be a part of it. He started to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and calm. Gutfeld seemed to realize he had pushed too far. Wait, come on, don't be so sensitive. We're just having a discussion here. No, Jackson said firmly, placing the microphone on the guest chair. A discussion requires two people who respect each other. You've made it clear you don't respect me, and I'm not going to sit here and let you treat me like I'm some kind of joke. Samuel, come on, Gutfeld said, his tone suddenly shifting to something that almost sounded like backpedaling. Don't leave. The audience wants to hear from you. Jackson looked out at the audience, then back at Gutfeld. The audience deserves better than watching someone get torn down for entertainment. They deserve actual conversations, actual insights, actual humanity. Not whatever this is. This is ridiculous, Gutfeld muttered, but his voice had lost its edge. He looked rattled now, uncertain. No, Jackson said, his voice clear and strong. What's ridiculous is that you think this is entertainment. What's ridiculous is that you built a career on making people uncomfortable and calling it honesty. What's ridiculous is that I actually thought you might be different than your reputation. He turned to walk away, and that's when Gutfeld made his biggest mistake. Fine. Walk away, Gutfeld shouted after him. Run back to Hollywood where everyone will tell you how amazing you are. See if I care. Jackson stopped. He turned slowly, and the look on his face made even Gutfeld take a step back. You know what the difference is between us? Jackson's voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire studio. I've spent my career trying to tell stories that matter, stories that make people think, that make people feel something real. You've spent your career trying to make people feel small, and you think that makes you important. I am important, Gutfeld insisted, but his voice cracked slightly. I have a platform. I have influence. You have a platform, Jackson agreed, and you're wasting it. You could use your show to actually connect with people, to have meaningful exchanges, to learn something. Instead, you use it to feed your ego by tearing down your guests. I don't tear anyone down, Gutfeld protested weakly. You've been tearing me down since I walked out here, Jackson said. Every question was designed to diminish what I do. Every comment was meant to make me look bad. And why? Because it makes you feel powerful? Because it gets ratings? Gutfeld didn't answer. He just stood there, his earlier confidence completely gone. I've been in this industry for decades, Jackson continued. I've worked with the best and I've dealt with the worst. But I've never been on a show where the host was so determined to make their guests look foolish. And you know what the really sad part is? You don't even see what you're doing wrong. I was just trying to, Gutfeld started, but Jackson cut him off. You were trying to make yourself look smart by making me look dumb. That's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just cruelty dressed up as honesty. The audience was completely silent. Some people looked uncomfortable, others looked angry on Jackson's behalf. A few were nodding in agreement with his words. "I came here tonight in good faith," Jackson said. "I came here ready to have a fun conversation, to talk about my work, to connect with your audience. But you didn't want any of that. You wanted a circus. You wanted drama. Well, you got it. But not the kind you were hoping for." He started walking toward the exit again, and this time, Gutfeld didn't try to stop him with words. Instead, he gestured frantically to his producers off camera. "Security," Gutfeld said suddenly. "We need security in here." Jackson stopped and turned around one more time, genuine surprise on his face. "Security? Are you serious right now?" "You're being disruptive," Gutfeld said, trying to regain some authority. "You're making a scene on my show." "I'm making a scene?" Jackson's voice rose with disbelief. "You spent the last 10 minutes insulting me and my career, and I'm the one making a scene by refusing to sit there and take it?" "You're being unprofessional," Gutfeld insisted, his face flushed. "You agreed to come on this show, and now you're walking out in the middle of it. Unprofessional?" Jackson repeated. "Let me tell you what's unprofessional: inviting someone to your show and ambushing them with insults, asking questions designed to embarrass rather than enlighten, treating your guests like they're beneath you. That's unprofessional." Two security guards appeared from backstage, looking uncertain about what they were supposed to do. "Escort him out," Gutfeld ordered, pointing at Jackson. The security guards looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Jackson looked at them and shook his head slowly. "Don't worry," Jackson said calmly. "I'm leaving. But I'm leaving because I choose to, not because you're throwing me out." "There's a difference. The result is the same," Gutfeld snapped. "You're gone." Jackson walked past the security guards, who didn't make any move to actually escort him. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time. "You know what the sad thing is, Greg?" Jackson said. "You could have had a great show tonight. You had someone sitting across from you with decades of experience, stories to tell, insights to share. But you were so focused on trying to score points that you missed the opportunity. That's on you. Get out of my studio," Gutfeld said, his voice shaking slightly. "Gladly," Jackson replied. "But before I go, let me say something to your audience." He looked directly at the crowd. "Don't let people treat you the way this man treated me tonight. Don't let anyone make you feel small to make themselves feel big. You deserve respect." "We all do." The audience erupted in applause. It started with a few people and quickly spread through the entire studio. People were standing up, clapping loudly, some even cheering. Gutfeld stood behind his desk, his face a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Sit down," he shouted at the audience. "This is my show." But the applause continued. It grew louder. Jackson gave a small nod of acknowledgement to the crowd, then walked off the stage with his head held high. As the studio doors closed behind him, the applause was still echoing through the space. Gutfeld stood there, alone behind his desk, with an audience that was clearly not on his side anymore. "Well, Gutfeld," said into his microphone, trying to regain control. "I guess some people can't handle a real conversation," but his words fell flat. The energy in the room had completely shifted. A few people in the audience booed. Others just shook their heads. The producers were scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. Gutfeld looked at the camera, his trademark smirk gone, replaced with something that looked almost like panic. "We'll be right back after this break," he said quickly, and the red recording light went off. The moment the camera stopped rolling, chaos erupted. Producers rushed onto the stage, talking frantically into their headsets. Gutfeld ripped off his own microphone and threw it onto the desk. "What just happened?" one of the producers asked. "He walked out?" Gutfeld said, stating the obvious. He couldn't handle the questions. "Those weren't questions," someone from the audience shouted. "You were just being mean." Gutfeld spun around to face the crowd. "I was doing my job. I was asking tough questions." "You were being disrespectful," another audience member called out. He was right to leave. More voices joined in, a chorus of disapproval directed at the host. Gutfeld looked around, seeming to realize for the first time that he had completely lost the room. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "If that's how you all feel, then maybe you should leave too." Several people actually did start heading for the exits. The producers looked horrified. This was turning into a disaster that would be talked about for weeks, maybe months. Backstage, Jackson was having his own conversations. Crew members approached him, apologizing for how the interview had gone. "That wasn't right. One camera operator said, "I've worked on this show for 2 years and I've never seen him go after someone like that." "It's all right," Jackson replied, his anger already cooling into something more like disappointment. "I just wish he understood that. You can ask challenging questions without being cruel. There's a way to have real discussions without tearing people down. He's not going to change," another crew member said sadly. "This is who he is. He thinks being provocative is the same as being interesting." Jackson nodded. "That's his problem to deal with. I'm just sorry his audience had to witness that." Back in the studio, Gutfeld was trying to film the rest of his show, but the energy was completely dead. The remaining audience members sat in stony silence. When Gutfeld made jokes, no one laughed. When he tried to move on to other topics, people seemed disengaged. "You know what?" Gutfeld finally said, about 20 minutes after Jackson had left. "I think we're going to call it a night. Thank you all for coming." The audience filed out quietly, many of them still talking about what they had witnessed. Some were already pulling out their phones, ready to share their first-hand accounts on social media. In the parking lot, Jackson sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine. He felt frustrated, but also oddly at peace with his decision. He had stood up for himself. He had refused to be diminished. And he had done it without losing his composure or stooping to Gutfeld's level. His phone was already blowing up with messages from his team, from friends, from other actors who had heard what happened, but he ignored them for now. He would deal with all of that later. Inside the studio, Gutfeld sat alone in his dressing room. His producers had tried to talk to him, but he had waved them away. He stared at himself in the mirror, and for just a moment, he let his mask slip. He looked tired, uncertain, maybe even a little ashamed. But then his phone buzzed with a message from the network. They wanted to talk about the incident. They wanted to discuss how to handle the media coverage. And just like that, the mask was back on. Gutfeld straightened his tie, fixed his hair, and prepared to spin the story in his favor. Because that's what he did. That's who he was. The cleaning crew came in after everyone had left. They swept the stage, arranged the chairs, turned off the lights. In a few hours, they would come back and set everything up for the next show. A new guest would sit in that chair. Gutfeld would smile his smile, ask his questions, and the cycle would continue. But something had changed that night. A line had been crossed. A moment had occurred that people wouldn't forget. Samuel L. Jackson had walked onto that stage as a guest and walked off as something more than that. He had become a symbol of what it means to stand up for yourself, to refuse to be treated poorly, to demand respect even when it's not freely given. And Gutfeld, whether he realized it or not, had shown everyone exactly what happens when you mistake cruelty for cleverness, when you confuse provocation with insight, when you think making someone else look small will somehow make you look big. The cameras had captured every second of it, the confrontation, the escalation, the final walkout. And while Gutfeld might try to control the narrative, the truth of what happened in that studio would speak for itself. Jackson drove through the night, the city lights blurring past his windows. He thought about all the interviews he had done over the years, all the conversations he had had with hosts who were curious and respectful and genuinely interested in dialogue. Those were the moments that mattered. Those were the conversations that actually meant something. This night, this interview, this confrontation with Gutfeld was something else entirely. It was a reminder that not everyone deserves your time. Not every platform is worth your presence. Not every conversation is worth having. He had learned that lesson clearly tonight, and he had no regrets about walking away. Behind him, the studio grew dark and quiet, waiting for the next day, the next show, the next moment of conflict that Gutfeld would inevitably create, because that's what he knew how to do. That's what his show was built on. But Samuel L. Jackson was done being a part of it. He had said his piece, made his stand, and walked away with his dignity intact. And sometimes, that's all you can do.